Activism does not stand outside of the arena of our self-awareness, but rather springs from a deeper sense of self in relationship to other and the world. Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolen, author and Jungian psychiatrist, has put her understanding of human nature and need to the task of world change. Using the symbol of the circle, she has advocated and supported millions of women worldwide who come together in circles. Her most recent book, Moving Toward the Millionth Circle, is a call to all women to support each other worldwide in the task at hand, to preserve the earth, to bring equality and prosperity to every nation and community. To this end, she is a tireless champion of energizing a global women's movement, including a Fifth World Conference on Women at the UN. Jean joins us tonight for a discussion of our shared co-arising and the hope she has for the world's evolution. It sounds like revelation and evolution together, an elevation, and UN conference she is part of. Thank you for joining us, Jean.
It's a pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Well, your recent book, Moving Toward the Millionth Circle, Energizing the Global Women's Movement, is small but powerful. It's a Canary Press 2013. And I thought maybe it would be interesting for our audience to appreciate how your background in Jungian psychology and Jungian approach sort of enriches your approach to the world and the world's needs.
There's several different ways to answer your question. One is on the personal sense of how when anyone gets a kind of mission or an assignment that is aligned with who they are and to get excited about changing something and believing you can, and then finding that as you do this that others join you and there's a synchronistic kind of way in which the world seems to be saying, go, girl, go. And it is an activism that, from a Jungian standpoint, and Jungians are usually a pretty introverted bunch, so I will have to be speaking some to them as well about how to become an extroverted activist on behalf of something that deeply makes sense to me, is what a Jungian would call individuation, or living one's personal myth, as well as taking on, in this case, a unexpected turn in my life, because the path of growth or individuation can be kind of a labyrinthine one, and it has been. And so I did not set out to be the major advocate for UN Fifth Women's World Conference. I had not even been to the UN before I wrote another little book called The Millionth Circle, which one could say took me there. And then it was a series of insights.
Talk to us a little bit about the circle. And I'm sorry I interrupted you, but you were one of these wonderful thinkers who actually pauses. Because I can't see you, I have to wait. So let you finish your thought, and then we'll come to the meaning of a circle.
I could fit right in.
All right.
The circle, the notion of, you realize that one of the things is that my conversation can be rather multi-layered and spiral rather than linear. So if you and your audience will bear with me, the circle is quite different from a patriarchy, and patriarchy is based on hierarchy, which is a top power at the top, and it's a pyramid where the people at the bottom have less power, less resources, less of everything, less control of their lives, and the people at the top, or whether we're talking about a government or a corporation or a family or a couple even. A couple can be a hierarchy where one person has more power and whose needs and perceptions take precedence over the other, and then it's called, one is encouraged to be the narcissist and the other is encouraged to be the codependent. But that's what hierarchy looks like. The people at the bottom adapt to the needs and the requirements and the fears of the people at the top. But if you take a circle, and a circle can be two people or an institution, as far as how it can be seen that everybody matters. A family that is a circle is a very different one than a family that's a hierarchy. And so I had a lot of experience of seeing that a circle, especially one with a spiritual or sacred center, is very much like your original question. How is the circle like, how is it to be a Jungian analyst and to have a sense of the Jungian sense of the psyche and see it playing out in a sense in a circle as well? That the circle with a spiritual center is one in which first everyone sitting around the circle is facing each other. And the idea of speaking the truth of one's own experience and listening with the heart from the other person in a way that is the lessons of being in a women's circle over years and finding about that experience is very similar to be in my analytic office, where although I'm the analyst and the other person has come in with the problems, the way I see the work is that we are both contributing, and there isn't a superior, inferior, a sense of power over, even though I may be contributing my insights. The person is bringing the material to this experience. And it's when you've been in a circle over years and you watch each other grow and deal with things, and when you're concerned for the others in the circle, and if somebody is going for an operation, there's a sense of praying for that person. The experience gets very deep and it's out of my experience with circles that I would really want everyone who is doing what I call heart-centered activism to have a circle.
And it doesn't matter where one has it, if it's at church or at school or in the family, or and I think that's the beautiful thing about women in general is women, and much of what you talk about, I feel like I have so many things I'd like to ask you to articulate further, but we won't have the time. But I did notice that some of what you talk about, we've talked about on this program before, and that you've spoken of in prior shows with myself or with my husband. And there is a difference between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain, and women in general tend to work from a very intuitive, holistic, integrative perspective versus a patriarchy, which is very left hemisphere, very hierarchical, as you point, it very separates, analyzes. And so there's some element of what you speak of, which is really bringing out the right hemisphere talent that exists in the world that is suppressed and abused.
That's very true. In fact, if we could change the world in the direction that I think that women could, at a time when the planet and humanity's in a pretty crisis mode, and we're in a rather exciting, I think we're in a very exciting time where transition into a much more whole right, left brain, women, men, working together could change the world. But it's up to the women. It's just like in a partnership of two. The codependent, which is usually the woman, has the power to change the dynamics of the relationship more than the narcissist, who has been supported to believe that power over is just fine and his say, it's usually a him, but these days it's not always, but say it's a him who has certain prejudices, has certain attitudes, is very left brain, and the partner who goes along with supporting everything that the person who has more power wants or perceives actually is the one who, if she speaks up and if she speaks from her feelings and what she notices, because there is a bond, she's the one who could change the relationship. In the world, it's the women, it's us, who could change the world.
And you even talk about the many times you met with or spoke on a stage with the Dalai Lama, that he made a very important comment that we've spoken about before, which is that it's the Western woman in particular who is on the brink of being able to change the world. Talk to us a little bit about that and your engagement with the Dalai Lama and why this was such an important addition in your life.
Well, it's the last chapter of my little book, and I was realizing how much I have learned over decades from my encounters with the Dalai Lama, and how the reflections backwards. There's something about getting older and then being able to sort of look backwards and realize what the threads have been. And the experience with the Dalai Lama is one, he is truly a whole person who is able to be very present as a wise person, and also has a very happy inner child that he's not afraid to show. So that my first experience of him, before I was invited to be in a small audience with him, not knowing what I would ask given the opportunity or anything, and what I was immediately struck with, which no one had told me to expect, was his presence, and that he made chortling sounds like a happy baby, and I'd never heard a grown man sound that way. And that combination of being able to be in the moment from that place and yet be profoundly wise in so many ways was my first experience. Another experience was when he was pointing at his a blood vessel in his wrist and saying, freedom is in the blood, and that's like saying there's an archetype that we are born with an inner quest to be to have freedom, which I know from a Jungian Analyst that there is something about that we come into the world with a direction to be whole, to grow, that there's a healthy kind of wish to grow. But I hadn't heard anyone talk about how freedom is in the blood, which is like an archetype. And then when I see the Tahrir Square and the Arab Spring and things like that, I'm realizing he's right, that you give people an idea of what democracy is, and they respond. So, and then there was a time when I really got a sense that it is up to, I was on the stage, I've been on the stage with him a number of times, and this time was in San Francisco when there was an audience that was primarily postmenopausal gray-haired women, I think. I mean, there were...
Count me in.
And everybody was talking about, we're going to hand it on to the next generation and of young men who were also on stage. And that was when something in me just said, wait a minute, that the women that could really change things now are the post-women's movement women who have never existed on this planet before like we are today. That we are, we've had opportunities of education and resources. We've traveled. We've valued our gender, and we've had an experience of empowerment. And once we're in our 50s and 60s and 70s, we still have many more decades of active years. Plus, we have gratitude that we're still here. So, isn't it up to us to take the opportunity and really do this? And so when the Dalai Lama said that it's up to the Western women to change the world, and I'm writing this activist book that was really inspired by my need to say to people who didn't get it why we needed a Fifth Women's World Conference. It wasn't about a conference, but about bringing women's wisdom and women's ability to sustain the planet and children and what I call Mother's Agenda. So I wrote the book, and at the very end, I went full circle to what did he mean by the Western women will save the world. And I had a sense that it had to do with having all these resources and connections and having used them. And only in retrospect will we see whether it's true or not. But I believe it is true. And it's an exciting time to consider that what we do now in the next decade, which includes bringing the women of the world together in a Fifth Women's World Conference, and it being like the Olympics for every NGO that takes care of women and girls in the world, and to bring in the women who have made it financially and corporately to provide, they wouldn't be fellowships, I guess, maybe we'd call them sisterships, that would help fund women from all over the world who couldn't afford to come, as well as fund and help there to be simultaneous conferences wherever there was a number of women who wanted to organize and put it together and then make the technical kind of connections.
That's beautiful. I mean, the whole quantum capacity of that many millions of women gathered at the same time in space, wherever they are, really does have a change on the planet, which would be this massive wave. I mean, I can really see the image that goes along with this dream that comes from the heart. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the issue of sovereignty. I think today is the anniversary of the Women's Suffragist March on Washington. And it's also the celebration of the seventh prophetess, Esther, and the freedom of the Jewish people who were one people even though they were scattered all over the world. And it was through prayer and working together that they were able to overcome the genocide that had been planned for them. And I kind of think of those two things along with your presence and talking about the 5th UN Conference on Women as all really being the same story of sovereignty and the revolution that is love.
Hello, I am Amit Goswami, author of The Self-Aware Universe and How Quantum Activism Can Save Civilization. And we're listening to 21st Century Radio with Zohara, Hieronimus. It's a wonderful show of the new paradigm that is going on right now.
Amen to that, Dr. Amit Goswami. Beautiful work on quantum activism, and that parlays really to the brilliant truth that Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolen is sharing with us. Her recent Canary 2013 release, Moving Toward the Millionth Circle, Energizing the Global Women's Movement. You can learn more about the upcoming events at the United Nations and the efforts she and other women around the world are working on a 5th World Conference on Women. Go to www.jean, Jean Bolen, BOLEN.com. That's www.jeanbolen.com. And of course, we have a link at 21st21stcenturyradio.com. So one of the things, Jean, before we get to specifically the 5th World Conference that you're part of, I wanted to talk a little about something you wrote in your book about the tension of opposites, which in Jungian therapy is vital, because I think that this tension is what so many of us are feeling all of the time and aren't always quite sure what to do with it.
Well, the necessity always is to hold it rather than to swing from one side to the other. And to hold it, what opposite are you thinking of, for example?
Well, for instance, just the difference between women wanting autonomy and equality and men and hierarchies, whether it's in business or government, not being real enthused or supportive of it.
Just as we have within the psyche, say, our logical side and our intuitive feeling side, or our mind and our heart, that to hold both and to realize that they can be in conflict. Or there was a poem about he drew a circle that shut me out, but something, and I had the heart to win. We drew a circle that included him. There's something about the tension of opposites in which you hold the opposites and expand to take in both positions. That is, if you can understand with compassion the position of the other person and not project onto that person, but talk, dialogue, speak across a circle, that's how differences are not just mediated. They get solved because they get understood. And then collaboration and cooperation and some solutions can be worked out. I mean, this is a gift that women as a gender have, so that, for example, if women are present with equal power and around the peace table, and a woman with the capacity to to, we spend a lot of time as women understanding other people. We start out doing that often girls do that. Girls talk about and learn a lot about psychology of relationships because they share what they feel. And so as a gender, we're often called the empathic gender. Maybe it doesn't apply. The stereotypes apply maybe to 2/3 of any given gender, either gender. So, but if 2/3 of the women are likely to be naturally empathic, and we're sitting at a peace table with enough clout to really enter the dialogue, one of the things we're doing is that we're understanding what's motivating the alpha males that are sitting there viewing the peace table perhaps more as something to be won and lost rather than something to truly resolve. And so when the UN passed in 2000 the Women, Peace, and Security Resolution, they acknowledged that women are able to do things in working towards peace. And I think that part of it is this whole communication and reading the feelings of each other and reading the feelings of the men, and then not polarizing into just power kinds of positions. And whether it's how to make space, how to truly compromise on what really matters, to hold what really matters and realize what the other person can give up without losing face or without losing something important. How do you do that if you are a left brain person and the major thing you've adapted to is getting more power so that you can have power over? Then you may lose this discussion because you have less power, but boy, you'll wait until you come back to the table with a better hand to play or something like that.
I sort of look at these, having been an activist most of my life, and there was a period where I just couldn't do it anymore because it seemed so polarizing. It was an us and them rather than an all of us. And still, I admit, like many activists like myself, it's very difficult to come up with an inclusive dialogue. For instance, fracking. Fracking has taken over this country all of a sudden as if it's the new fantastic find of oil. Meanwhile, it destroys the aquifers, destroys the air, destroys the health of the communities in which it exists, destroys the water in which they tap into to do the gas extraction. And yet it's being touted now even by the Department of Energy. We think to ourselves, oh, my Lord, what do we need? What is it that people who don't feel what's going on the earth, what don't they get?
They don't have the feelings for... It even gets down to sort of whether you have an I-it attitude towards other people or to the planet, or whether you have an I-thou sense that what I do to the planet will affect me. If not me right now, life. Why do I care about these things? Well, it's very sad when people don't care about it, when they are looking at short-term profit. It's a game. The difference between looking at, like the Vietnam War, at times at the beginning, we were doing body counts as if it were a scorecard. The whole capacity to feel is really what is lacking. And like the UN Commission on the Status of Women, one of the major things that is heartbreaking is really to hear about trafficking of little girls, of women, of the sex trade, of how can you take another human being and treat them in this awful fashion where you can, if you don't have a feeling connection, the person is an it. The animal that is maltreated is an it. The planet itself, you don't see the beauty. You don't see. What is a real problem is to have the major decisions in the world made by a species that at the top that cannot see beauty or love or feel for others, that's what goes on.
You know, after my years of activism and covering so many different global things, whether it was the World Bank or the IMF or even sometimes the UN's conduct, which isn't necessarily representing the member nations because it's political appointees and employees, I coined this term called the death economy, that we currently exist on this planet under a death economy. And you see it in the business of wars industry. You see it in the raping of women and the earth. You see it just pretty much in everything, versus a simple switch to a life economy, and using that terminology seemed to be a broad stroke, large enough to a simple banker to understand, well, if it's a life economy, you're going to do preventive medicine. You're not going to focus on drugging everybody to death. And if it's a life economy, you're going to think about microloans to women who, if they're literate and they grow the trees, has a much greater prosperity. We know that as a matter of fact. And so I've often thought that one little switch of emphasizing that we have a death economy and everything that goes with that, and if we could just switch to a life economy, everything goes with it. So we're talking about really fundamentally a very enormous paradigm shift of, I guess, bringing the head to the heart. So talk to us a little bit more about heart-centered activism, and then we'll spend the rest of the evening looking at the UN Fifth World Conference on Women at the UN.
Well, I have a broad sense of activism, and that is when you take a position that really matters to you, and you see it through because it is really a significant element in who you are. So my experience of going to the UN CSW and meeting women who have been often working under very difficult circumstances, often providing for others what wasn't provided for them, like the woman who was trafficked and then goes to rescue young girls who are being trafficked. The kind of thing that over and over again I've seen women running NGOs on shoestrings, using what's at hand to help wherever they are, whether it's to plant trees or save girls or stop something awful that's going on. They've done it. And I kind of was in awe about what I was seeing and hearing, and also was inspired, and I kind of wondered, well, I came up with a sense of how, again, why it is that they keep on keeping on when they do, and have the energy they have. And it came down to what I call a heart-centered activist, that it is someone who is doing what she is doing because it's meaningful to her. And it's meaningful because it is something that she knows about firsthand. Usually it grows out of a childhood in which there are all kinds of things that happen to people in childhood that shouldn't happen to them. And now they're adults, and they are doing what they're doing because it's personally deeply meaningful to them. It will not be necessarily meaningful to somebody else, but it is meaningful for them. And then I think to be a successful meaning that you really can put your heart and soul into something, and you can do it because at some level it's fun. So meaningful, fun meaning that you do it with others who have values like you do, and you feel like what you're doing is doing some good, and it's fun because it uses you. We all have different abilities and things, but when you've taken on a cause and you can use your ability in furthering it, whatever that is, it's fun to keep on doing that. And finally, I think it matters a whole lot that your activism is motivated by love. Love of whatever it is you're trying to save or whoever it is you're trying to save. And it could be a principle or a person. It could be a beautiful part of the world. It could be it could be an animal that you want to stop from being suffering, or children, whatever it is. And initially, one of the things that other people may see is the rage that you have because something that you value deeply is being trashed. But unless the underlying energy is love, I think what happens is you get burnt out because you can't really sustain activism based on anger. So I'm saying heart-centered activists are motivated and have meaning, fun, and motivation by love underlying whatever in particular they're doing.
But you know that go ahead. I was just going to say that it's that very issue of working from love and not anger is something I've talked with other adult activists because we all went through tremendous anger phases. Yes. And only in our older years, in our 50s, 60s, and 70s, are we able to skip the anger part. To some degree, though, I have to say the rage is tremendous, but it comes out with a greater compassion because you have a broader sense of time. True. But younger people, it's very hard to educate a young person of how to have activism that isn't anger motivated. And I think it's a tremendous challenge worldwide. True.
It helps for them to be reminded of where their anger is coming from, though, about the kind of better world or better situation or innocence that they want to help sustain or beauty they want to sustain. And they feel for it because they love it. They love how it, and it's to just be reminded of that as being part of what motivates them, because anger just is not very nourishing to the person who is consumed by it at all.
No, and not at all. Or to the people around them.
That's very true.
Well, there we are. We'll take a little break, and then we'll be right back. Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolen is our guest, moving toward the Millionth Circle, Energizing the Global Women's Movement, Canary Press 213 release. But, of course, we'll be talking the rest of the evening about the UN Fifth World Conference on Women and what everybody can do to make a difference.
Hello, my name is Matthew Fox, and I'm a spiritual theologian, author of a number of books, including Christian Mystics and The Pope's War. And you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zoe, and I commend Dr. Zoe for her wonderful work and for having a program that offers alternative ways of seeing the world and seeing it through the glasses of spirituality and ethics. So stay listening.
Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolen is one of these people who is hoping that it's faster, and by doing so, she is promoting the UN Fifth World Conference on Women. You can learn more at her website, jeanbolen.com. That's Jean Bolen, Bolen.com. Jean, tell us a little bit about the UN conference that you're a part of.
Every spring, the Commission on the Status of Women meets for 2 weeks. And while the CSW meets, there's a forum that goes on with the NGO delegates from all over the world who are out there doing work on the ground. And they present events it's sort of like going to a big campus and having to look at the program to see what course you could take in the slot from 8:30 to 10 and the one from 10:30 to 12 and things like that, because something is going on all the time during the 2 weeks. So your ability to sort of drop in and hear the people talk that are doing whatever they're doing, where they are doing it, and it's all over the world, is very remarkable. And it's a world that more people should be exposed to understand what is going on and what the women of the world are truly doing. And it is out of that when I first went to the UN in 2002, I thought, of course, in 2005 there would be another World Conference on Women, because there was a whole series of them, from Mexico City to Copenhagen, Nairobi, and then Beijing. Beijing was in 1995, and I expected there was going to be one another one in 2005. And I go to the UN in 2002, and I learned, no, there's not going to be one in 2005. In fact, we had our conferences. The time of women's conferences is over. And here we are in the 21st century. The last one didn't even have much internet at all. What would it be like if we could come together in the 21st century with all of the internet kinds of things? What about how we could be in communication with each other across the world, before, during, after, and whatever someone is doing that's making a difference could be adopted by someone else who's working on the same issue, but halfway across the world. It just felt to me that the ability to kind of accelerate change by bringing and empowering women and bringing the sacred feminine and the feminine principle into the world at a time when it isn't incorporated, we've had it, that this is a time in which we really need to bring women together, which would be the 5th Women's World Conference, because the UN, for all of its faults, is the one organization that still has a credibility of being like, the beacon on the hill. And I learned when I went to New York that there are women in Africa, for example, who are in neighboring countries that meet only in New York during the CSW. There are lots of countries that will allow visas for their women to travel if it's to a UN conference. And I've been part of great big international conferences, and those great big international conferences bring affluent, consciousness-raised people, women, the same people. How do you bring the women from Africa and Asia and lots of places that we don't normally cross paths with, and then if we do, to find and actually be inspired by them. That was my experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's so important, the thing you mentioned, because as Americans, we see the UN through a different lens than people of particularly third world countries who benefit from UNICEF or who benefit from the aid programs that are serious, even if you might have some disagreements with the roles they play in wars and disputes. And oftentimes there's lots of technical papers and not much muscle after that. There's a lot of lip service. But on the other hand, as you point out, there are many people of the world to whom the UN represents hope. And I, my mom was a UN representative under Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick. And even with all of its problems, it's still an opportunity of refinement. And there isn't another organization yet that has established itself that can be a place of world unity. I don't think it is yet, but it can be. And I think it's just fascinating that other women around the world, that the UN is really their vehicle for transformation.
Yes, it's the only thing. And also, what is amazing is the documents that the UN has endorsed and passed, and how if only they were implemented, if only every government would sign and follow through with them. And it's true. The United States is one of 3 or 4 countries in the world that has not signed CEDAW, which is the convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. And it is a powerful instrument that helps women to have rights and to be legally have a right to object to things that are totally unfair and things like that. The one I mentioned before, the Women, Peace, and Security resolution. See, there are so many resolutions that are great on paper. Some of them have been implemented, but an awful lot of it hasn't been. So, if women in the world realize that it exists and their government may have even signed it, and let's help the world to live up to the standards and ideals that are on those pieces of paper. because they're much more than pieces of paper. They really lay out the possibility of a world in which people have rights and freedoms, and out of it, every time you have a country that stops being oppressed and at war, what happens is that people start to grow in lots of other ways. When you're not in a war-torn country, you can grow things, and you could have schools, and the world changes once war stops, once abuse stops. So one of the things is to see how domestic violence and allowing it is a symptom of that is related to use of war to destroy peoples and countries at the other end of the spectrum. It's the same attitude.
One of the things we talked about a little earlier this evening with another guest was that the more television a young girl watches, the fewer options she sees for herself in the world. The more television a young boy watches, the more sexist he becomes. And so the images that, for those of us that went through the women's movement and thought, hurrah, hurrah, we have had so much sort of backtracking in terms of a woman's self-worth. And you see it in the Hollywood red carpet with women walking around semi-naked as if that's the only value you have is your physical body enticing men. And it's just tragic. But I do want to open to our audience the wonderful gift your publishers provide of your book, Moving Toward the Millionth Circle, Energizing the Global Women's Movement. It's a beautiful book, and I encourage you to read it and pass it on to others. What else, Jean, have we not touched on that you'd like to share with our audience?
Just the major thing that is well within reach of anyone is the idea of forming a support circle for your life, and to have it one that has a sacred or a spiritual center, which is the same as what's in all of us. This is not religion. Spirituality differs from religion. Spirituality unites us. It isn't about theology. It's about having a sense that you could call it compassion, call it love, you could call it wisdom as the center of the circle, but that there's something that we draw from. And that theory underlying the Millionth Circle, which is about the same thing, is that there's underlying the circle, there is a morphic field, or a collective unconscious, which Jung would call it. But the Rupert Sheldrake, the theoretical biologist, calls it a morphic field. And the thing of it is, when an idea moves through a species like our own, the more there are, the easier it is for that idea to grow faster and faster. And so the Millionth Circle is a metaphoric millionth circle. It's metaphoric. It's the one that tips the scales. It's the one that brings feminine values and the feminine principle and empowered women into the culture to balance men and male principles and end patriarchy. So the Millionth Circle is really a major envisioning. It is the circle that ends patriarchy in a way that it just gradually happens. Because once something becomes a norm, it becomes what we always, haven't we always had the right to vote? No, we haven't. We didn't get it until 1920. So when the idea of having men and women making decisions for humanity naturally together, that's not such a far-out idea once it gets to reach a tipping point of critical mass. We saw it with the idea of climate change. It was ridiculed until within a 2-year period it suddenly went from a ridiculous put-down idea to what is now pretty universally held. There's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come, and it grows through more and more people adopting it. So if you form a circle, or if you take the group you have and change it into a circle and with the intention that it is contributing to the experience of being in an egalitarian experience towards reaching the Millionth Circle, you're doing something for yourself, and you are contributing to a major change that I hope will come about.
It's beautifully spoken. You know, the Kabbalists speak of our being in the age of Yesod. In the Tree of Life, there's these 10 spheres of light, which are qualities of the Creator that each of us are made of, archetypes of action and courage and humility and truth and wisdom and understanding and all these beautiful things. But the age of Malchut, which we're moving into, is the bottom of the Tree of Life, and it's represented by our feet and our mouth. And it's so interesting because when it speaks of this age of Malchut, it's when the woman really will come to world presence, world power, in the sense of shining above her husband, meaning the moon will be greater than the sun. And it's a fascinating prophecy. And so we're sort of like coming into that age now, and your work is certainly, like women around the world, Jean, representative of that age. And so it gives me, and I hope our listeners, a lot of hope. Let me encourage you all to go to www.jeanbolen, Jean Bolen.com. Take part in the 5th World Conference on Women by following her work, and take a look at it. And wherever you can make a difference in a young girl's life or a young boy's life to encourage them towards equality and natural love, go do it. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington, and I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.